Jeremiah 18, verses 7 through 10. At one moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to pull down, or to destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the calamity I plan to bring on it. Or at another moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to build up or to plant it. If it does evil in my sight by not obeying my voice, then I will think better of the good which I had promised to bless it. When was the last time you actually looked and read the book of Habakkuk?
Before I got sick.
It was only because I was encouraged.
Oh, with all the prophecy that is being given about God moving and preparing to bring judgment, this would be a good time to look at this great little book. I mean, it's only 3 chapters.
Yeah.
It's only 3 chapters, and we know that there is little known about this individual Habakkuk himself, but we do know that his name means embracer. And what he was likely to have written in his book during the reign of the wicked king Jehoiakim, who ruled Judah from 609 to 598 BC. As to the message of Habakkuk, it is unique in that it records a conversation between the prophet and his God. And it's really funny when you think about it. How many times do we have conversations with God ourselves in our day and age? And do we hear him give us the answers to the questions that we have? Now, when you think about it, this book, it may start off a little on the high side of being on the gloomy scale. I mean, but after all, this prophet, he has foreseen all of the difficult days ahead for Israel. But it concludes with a tremendous hope and expectation that fittingly backs up the central message of the text, which is the just shall live by faith. Now, as I studied this particular book, I could not help but think about how much the stuff from that day resembles the same stuff that we're facing this day. And I mean, like completely. There's really no difference, which goes to show that all through the ages, we have not learned from history because we keep committing the same mistakes. These timeless words that Habakkuk gave and the timeless words that God replied in, they are just timeless in today's times, in today's world situation, as they did for that generation 2,600 years ago. So let's start off with Habakkuk 1, verses 1 through 4. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at the injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. Now, Habakkuk was a prophet with a problem. Not a problem like what you and I would normally have, personal problems, but perplexing questions that required answers from God. You see, Habakkuk surveyed the world that he lived in, and he saw unbelievable injustice, violence, and inequality that never seemed to be judged. And this irritated him. It irked him. It perplexed him. So much so that he began to question God pretty harsh. We understand that. When you look at the Bible Knowledge Commentary introduction to this book, it is really pretty good. And it tells us, the planet Earth may look marvelous from a satellite, but for those who live on the dusty globe, things tend to look rather grim. There's increased turmoil, rising terrorism, mounting tragedies, unprecedented trauma, increasing pollution, deepening trials, and unparalleled tensions cast dark shadow over the earthlings. The world looks more and more like an ominous black sphere with a very short fuse, a time bomb sizzling to explode. Is it little wonder thinking people begin to ask questions? Why is there so much oppression? Why all the injustice? Why do evil men prosper? Why do the righteous suffer? Why doesn't God do something? Why doesn't God clean up this mess? Why? These penetrating questions are hardly new. Habakkuk's first question was, how long, God? How long do I cry out without an answer? Why don't you do something? It is a question we all ask from time to time. Things that we see in our own day and age, they can become so overwhelming. It was a question that was asked quite frequently by some of God's stars, like David, Job, and Jeremiah. And it is one that you and I have no doubt asked in our day and time. I know that I have. I've looked around this world and I've heard the news and I've watched the things that take place and I go, oh my gosh, God, how much longer till you return? How much longer can you put up with what's taking place? It's a common question because God works to His own timetable. He works to and for eternity. Always remember that. He is long-suffering. Things often seem to take a long time. But as we know, His purposes are still achieved. And our time is not His time. As Romans 5:3-4 states, suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character hope. You say you want to have a godly character? Good. Then you will have to learn perseverance, for that is its source. And perseverance takes time and leads to questions like the one Habakkuk had. Now, on a national or on a world scale, the same question be asked. Like Habakkuk surveying the situation in his day, we also look at the increasing immorality, injustice, and violence of ours and say, how much longer will this go on for? How long, Lord, before you judge this world? There was a cry of the souls under the altar of the book of Revelation, as it tells us in 6:10. How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? You see, it's just not in the past. It's not just in the current times. It is also in the future. It is the same question that it's asked over and over and over. And it is a common question asked by the saints of all generations. How much longer, Lord, will you put up with it? Now let's look at the source of the question. Habakkuk states that the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. Is that what we see today? The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted? The source of the problem was paralyzing of God's law in the day of Habakkuk. Is God's law paralyzed in our day amongst our judicial system? I would have to say yes. And it's getting blatant. It's coming out into your face. Yeah. What about in our schools, when laws are passed to prevent prayer and study of the Bible? Yet children are forced in some areas of the country to do what? To study Islam, the Quran, when other religions under the guise of, well, it's multicultural studies. As Western society moves further from the Christian foundations, the result is sadly the same as it was when Israel was departing from God's law in the days of Habakkuk. Psalm 119:26. It's time for you to act, O Lord, for they have regarded your law as void. God does not delay in giving him an answer. All those questions that he asked, the whys, the whens, and how longs, God answers him pretty quickly. Habakkuk 1, verses 5 through 11. Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days. You would not believe it if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. All of them come for violence. Their horde and faces move forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings and rulers and they are a laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap up a rubble to capture it. They will sweep through like a wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty. They whose strength is their God. God's reply is not one that Habakkuk was expecting. He was not prepared. In fact, it was a blow your socks off type of answer. Habakkuk thought that God was strangely silent and absent. Yet the truth was quite the opposite. God had told Habakkuk, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. Whew. For I'm going to do something in your day that you would not believe even if you were told. The truth was that God was already raising up the nation of Babylon to come against Judah. And believe me, this was something of a bombshell. Habakkuk knew about the Babylonians. He'd heard about them. He'd heard all those stories and he had seen the results. And it is fair to say that to hear God describe them as fierce, ruthless, dreaded, swift, devouring people bent on violence, did little to calm his nerves. Oh my goodness gracious! I don't believe it. I ask you why, how long, and all this other stuff, and this is what you tell me? Yet what puzzled Habakkuk the most was that God was going to use them. Use them of all people. How could God use such a godless nation? Why would he do that? Why would God use the ungodly Babylonians as he had other wicked nations to accomplish his purpose? But that wouldn't mean that the Babylonians would not heap upon themselves what they had sown. They were still responsible for their actions. This is stated in the text we are looking at, which ends in verse 11, saying that Babylonian, that they would be held guilty, that they whose strength is their God, they're still going to be held accountable. Jeremiah 25, 9 through 12 says, the Lord says, I will send to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and I will bring them against this land and against its inhabitants and against all these nations around about, and I will utterly destroy them. Then it will be 70 years are completed. I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares the Lord, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it an everlasting desolation. Desolation. Time for a little water sip. We know from the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar was specifically judged severely. Remember, he became as a wild animal and his hair and nails grew outrageously long and he was in a crazy state of mind for a while. Yet afterwards he also through that difficulty learned to trust and praise the God of heaven. How awesome is that? May that be the result amongst the nations that he judges in the last days. Before we see Habakkuk's response, Let's look at these verses as they relate to us today. While God's work in the days of Habakkuk was unthought of to our prophet, in the last days of God is going to do something more radical. Daniel 12:1 states that the time of distress, such as not had happened from the beginning of nations until then. Well, gosh, how is this applicable? Because this is what Daniel talked about. Well, when we see this echoed in Matthew 24:21, Jesus spoke also of the time, saying that there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never be equaled again. And also in Luke 21:26, men's hearts failing for them from fear and expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven will be shaken. Those times are not yet upon us, but the shadows and the storm clouds of the approaching days can be seen. And I do believe that wholeheartedly. So just as Habakkuk was instructed to look at the nations and watch, I think that we too should be looking around and see what God's working on. When we listen to the prophets on the online, on the radio, on TV, we hear them talking all the time. God is moving, and He's moving swiftly, getting ready to bring judgment. And He's working amongst the current upheaval occurring in nations around the world. So keep alert. Watch. Habakkuk thought nothing was happening but the invasion and destruction of Judah. Once it came, it was swift and unexpected upon most. What was Habakkuk's response? Well, so we're not going to die? I almost think that I would rather die than face the stuff coming from the Chaldeans. So are we going to be safe? Habakkuk 1:12 through 17. Are you not from the everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to correct. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on the wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? Why have you made men like the fish of the sea, like the creeping things without a ruler over them? The Chaldeans bring them all up with a hook and drag them away with their net, and gather them together in their fishing net. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their fishing net, because through these things their catch is large, and their food is plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net and continually slay nations without sparing? If we thought Habakkuk had a problem earlier when he thought God wasn't doing anything, after hearing God's response, he really had a problem now. He dwells on what Babylon has done to other nations. He likens them to the large net that catches and drags all men away without mercy. And this is who God is going to use? As he mulls this over, our good prophet struggles with the two main issues. How could a pure, holy God approve and use those who are wicked? And the second one being, how could God judge Judah using a nation that was more wicked than they? Isn't it amazing how you can change from worrying about how long, God, will you tolerate it, to you hear an answer and then you're going, oh my God, God, what are you doing? What were you ever thinking? And you start dwelling upon what is coming. This is why I don't think I want to ever be a prophet. You can ask all these questions. He shows you these things. And then, depending on how the answer comes to you, then I think it would drive me bonkers. Even though I have faith in God and trust Him in knowing that He knows what He's doing. J. Vernon McGee gets to the heart of Habakkuk's problem when he writes the following. This may be a new thought for you. You probably have heard it said even from some pulpits that God would never let Russia overcome the United States, because after all, we're the fair-haired boys, we're the good guys, the fine people. We're the ones who send missionaries to the godless nations. God would never use Russia to chastise us. My friend, if you believe the Bible, you will see God's method is to use a sinful nation to judge a people who are less sinful. If we could see what God is doing today behind the scenes, I am sure it would terrify us. I believe He is actually moving against our nation. Why? Because at one time our nation had a knowledge of God. Superficial though it may have been, the Bible was once held in reverence. Very few people knew much about it, but it was respected. In our day, the Bible is ignored and absolutely rejected by the nation. They may take an oath by placing their hands upon it, but they neither know nor care to know what is between its covers. Will God allow our nation to continue in its godlessness and in its flagrant sins? I don't think so. Will God use a godless nation to chastise us? Well, that was Habakkuk's question. Why would God, who is a holy God, use a pagan, heathen people to chastise His people? Believe it or not, this was written in 1981. 1981. And that's the time when we had that deathly fear of the Russians. We were told to hate them, not to trust them, to do everything we could to, not have anything to do with them. And it's fair to say that we often look back on those days as the good old days. Now, most people look back on days earlier than that as the good old days. A lot of people wish they could go back to the 50s and early 60s. The 40-plus years since haven't been the kind ones to the place of Christianity within Western society. We have seen a lot of big ups, we've seen a lot of big downs, and then we look at everything that's taking place right now, and we start to question, God, how much longer will you put up with this? Following on from this thought, to update Habakkuk's question to a modern example, would be like someone in Europe or in Europe or America crying out to God about the state of the church, and God replying, well, I have seen its state, and I'm raising up Islam. I'm raising up Islam to use as a judgment against my people. Not exactly what we would like to hear, now would it be? Yeah, I know you kind of shaking your head going, God knows what He's doing. Okay, well, I can agree with that. But it's still, when people think, no way, no how would God ever do that, well, they better pick up that Bible and they better read it because it's full of precedent that has been set in the past. As Habakkuk processes what he has heard, he rightly reminds God that the eternal promises that were made to the nation of Israel, that they would not be cut off completely, even though he understands that Judah requires judgment and correction. And thank God that He is always faithful to His promises. Habakkuk 3:2. And of course we'll hit 3:2 again in 2 weeks. Lord, I have heard the report about you, and I fear, O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make it known. In wrath remember mercy. This chapter, it started off with the puzzled prophet asking God why he isn't doing anything, and ends after God tells him what He's doing. Habakkuk is shocked at what God is doing. You just can't please some people. Yet even Habakkuk's latest question will be answered in chapter 2 as God outlines clearly why this judgment must come. And we will hopefully see it is a chapter that could have been written a month ago about our own world. And yet it is also a chapter that gives hope as it outlines that the righteous must live by faith in this difficult age, and that yet one day, the whole world will be filled with the knowledge and glory of God. Hebrews 10, 36 through 39. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come, and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith to preserving of the soul. Preserving of the soul. We must live by faith in this difficult time. The more we see that takes place, the more it may cause us to question, why, O Lord, are you waiting so long? Let's go to prayer.